Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to Weather Center Nazario. Today is October 28th, 2023. We are now 3 days away from Halloween night. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, you heard me say it. October has flown by, and this is the last official weekend of the month of October. I'm going to caveat that by saying even though we are 3 days away from November 1st, for that matter, we are still very heavily involved with what's going on out there for our hurricane season, particularly near to the Caribbean Sea. We're going to talk all about that today, and if you saw my Halloween short earlier today, yes, we are going to be breaking down what the weather looks like across much of the United States for Halloween night, October 31st, coming up here in a few days. We're here on the water vapor shot, and to tell you the truth, we had a very interesting setup come to fruition earlier this morning. We now have Invest 96L embedded in our area of confluent and converging wind flow associated with our two subtropical ridges out here we talked about during yesterday's segment. Now, if you all hearken back sometime about 10 to 12 days ago after the severe weather outbreak that occurred for the southeast and particularly over the Florida Peninsula between October 11th and October 12th, we had started highlighting that we would have a large area of breakaway jet energy potentially induce a surface level cyclone that will eventually transition off to the west-northwest towards the Bahamas, and we can finally say we are seeing that take shape. If you look closely on the water vapor imagery, you can see a large upper level low feature earlier on in the loop, which was associated with that breakaway piece of energy we discussed from our polar front jet that has been sort of marinating underneath our subtropical ridge embedded across the southeast Gulf of Mexico and our Atlantic higher height ridge that has also been sandwiched out there over the east and central Atlantic, helping to stew up a lot of the tropical moisture from the MDR straight across our Lesser Antilles. Both of these features have created a large tunnel of instability and moisture surging from not only our own little monsoonal trough we have over the ITCZ, but also the East Pac monsoonal trough, essentially dragging all that upper level vorticity, good surface-based buoyancy and instability, and all the thunderstorms you guys have been seeing out there in the Leeward, Windward Islands, Puerto Rico, the British Virgin Islands, U.S. Virgin Islands for that matter, and we finally had that interaction spin up a surface low pressure, and it is now highlighted Invest 96L. Not a whole lot of development associated with this, not a whole lot expected of it. It is going to continue to work off to the west-northwest, but if you take a quick glance over the United States and you see that very, very potent frontal system and trough axes barreling off to the east and then eventually the southeast, that is what's going to help knock it completely out to sea, potentially becoming an issue for Bermuda, although I don't think it's going to hold on to a lot of its intensity because with that front and with that trough comes a high level of upper level wind shear. So it's not going to be very long-lived. We shouldn't have too much in the way of concern with this outside of the Bahamas seeing some impacts to include elevated winds as well as some increased thunderstorm chances once it finally does continue to deepen down. If you take a look at a visible satellite shot for Invest 96L, you can clearly see a low-level center of circulation has formed with it. However, it just looks a little bit more disorganized as of right now. That spin is definitely there, but there isn't a whole lot of consolidation with its rain or thunderstorm activity as of yet, but this is anticipated to happen if you look across all of our model platforms. In terms of intensity guidance, some of our long-range intensity models do anticipate this could become a named system, and if it does, it could steal the name Vince from our other area of disturbed weather down there in the southern Caribbean, which a lot of our models have lost pretty much all of their confidence will eventually take shape into something to affect Jamaica and maybe the Cayman Islands. We are still anticipating a low-level spin to come out of the Caribbean, as well as a second low that I've got my eye on here in the Weather Center for the very beginning of November between the 2nd and the 5th that could also intensify down there over the southern Caribbean before maybe either crashing into Central America, or we have once again seen a trend where our upper level pattern could become favorable for this thing to wander to the north, and I'll show you that the GFS once again may not have been fully out to sea in terms of that depiction we saw earlier this week. We're also still watching 92E. Overnight yesterday, it did look a little bit more disorganized than what we saw yesterday. I thought that it would continue to intensify and further consolidate and deepen down into our next name system out there, but it looks like Mother Nature decided to put that on pause for just a little bit longer until we begin to figure out exactly if it's going to retrograde back to the east or slowly continue off to the west. All right, so once again, surprisingly, we're going to start off with our 12Z GFS. This is a fresh model run, a hot model run with fresh analysis data plugged into the model. And you can see right out of the gate, this is 18 Zulu tomorrow, so this is 2 p.m. tomorrow Eastern Standard Time, and you can see 1,005 millibar surface low associated with Invest 96L. So all of our models are definitely in agreement. We could see a little bit of intensification from it, albeit it won't be anything substantial. We'll continue to monitor it for our folks out there in the Bahamas as well as Bermuda, depending on how much that upstream frontal system can can vacate it out to the east-northeast, it could potentially be another rainmaker after we saw Tammy sort of influencing the weather for Bermuda down the road. We'll keep an eye on it for you guys out there in Bermuda and the northern Bahama Islands as well, but I honestly do not see anything significant coming from it, at least for the time being. The area isn't all that favorable for rapid intensification or the development of a full-fledged tropical storm. And when I say that, I mean like a high-end tropical storm playing around with the threshold of becoming a hurricane. As we've noticed, the sea surface temps and our ocean heat content to the north of our Caribbean Sea has dissipated quite a bit as we've rolled through October and is expected to do so as we go into the month of November. Now, we're going to take this through time, and where I want you to focus on is in our central Caribbean Sea. You can see the GFS is back on board with cyclogenesis occurring to the south of Jamaica, and over the last couple days, our steering pattern over North America would suggest this would eventually crash land somewhere either in Nicaragua or Honduras, maybe wander as far north as the coastline of Belize as nothing more than a disorganized low-pressure center. But as of 0Z last night and into 12Z now today, we have seen a return of the favorable pattern that could deepen this system a little bit more and then walk its way towards the Cayman Islands and Cuba. What's very interesting on this model run is the fact that the GFS is now anticipating that we could maybe have some sort of a tropical feature coming up out of the Caribbean, meeting up with our next potential El Nino-looking low-pressure system. Very, very hypothetical, very speculative for this time. We're still very ways away. As you can see, even at this current point in the model run, this is November 9th. Very well outside of the realm of very good possibilities, or at least very good accuracy for a lot of our long-range model data. But I thought this was very bizarre, and I'll show you exactly why I think this is even more so bizarre when we get to the Euro in a moment. You take this to the very tail end of the loop, and you can see we have a low beginning to deepen down over Louisiana, Mississippi, and we have just a widespread area of very significant weather associated with this. And this would technically be, for all intents and purposes, this is going to sound very sensationalist, this would be a really, really bad scenario for the southeast. You have an El Nino low pressure supported by our polar front jet moving through. You can see our 540 line indicative of our polar jet coming down and really amplifying that pattern. And we have whatever this possible feature could be coming out of the Caribbean at the same time. Do I think this is our end result? It's a possibility, and I'll show you exactly why here in a moment. Anyways, you finish up the loop, and you can see these two are on a collision course across the southeast, going through the Panhandle and the southern tip of Florida, and then eventually evacuating off to go their separate ways once they get to the mid-Atlantic coastline. Now, before we jump the gun and think this is once again GFS anticipating the worst-case scenario and being very bullish towards its la-la land portion of the forecast loop, let me show you what our overnight Euro control members did. As you take this through time, you can see the Euro doesn't anticipate a whole lot of strengthening with our Invest 96L, nor the likes of our other area of disturbed weather down there in the Caribbean. But check this out. I'm going to fast forward to day 5 and then out to about day 7, day 8. And as you track this through to the end of the loop, notice that the Euro is now on board with an area of low pressure wandering out of the Western Caribbean, moving to the north, and then pay close attention to what's happening upstream. As I get towards the back end of this run, look at how the Euro is anticipating 2 areas of low pressure moving over the Panhandle and over towards Cuba into the southern portion of Florida. Very unique setup. I'm very interested to see how this continues to unfold, if this becomes the trend from both our GFS and our Euro. The Canadian model also highlighted the potential that we could see a baroclinic system spin up over the extreme southeast, the Gulf Coast states. So we definitely have something we want to watch out for. We could have 2 birds with 1 stone in this case, where we have a low-pressure baroclinic system coming across the deep south, and then potentially our last major tropical system coming up out of the Caribbean source region. You track this through, and you can see the Euro is anticipating 2 distinct areas of low pressure impacting the southeast United States and then eventually deepening into something stronger as it continues up the eastern seaboard. So very interesting stuff. I definitely wanted to get that out there first before we roll into our Halloween forecast, because that could be something potentially serious we have to kind of gear up for as we go forward into November before we close out the hurricane season altogether. All right, we're going to take a quick glance at our 0Z Euro steering pattern and our upper level flow to determine exactly how favorable the setup is down there in the Caribbean in terms of getting that secondary low, not the first one currently highlighted, but that second one closer to the beginning of November. You can see all in all, as we go through October 31st and into the early portions of November, you have nothing but difluent flow down there over the Caribbean. You have lots of rising air, which will induce low pressure down at the surface. All of our shear is going to be predominantly to the north with that trough axis kicking through, bringing in our next major frontal system that's going to try to make it down here for Halloween night. Unfortunately, we down here in the extreme southeast are going to be spared the cold weather. It's going to be very warm and muggy. I'll tell you that here in a moment. But then as you go towards the tail end of the loop and we expect cyclogenesis to take place, you just continue to see that anticyclone aloft. This is 200 millibars situated down there over our source region in the Caribbean. So all in all, shear and upper level rising motion is definitely there for something to develop as we get into the final month of hurricane season. Very briefly, I'll show you the ensemble probability. So there is definitely a very good chance we'll see some kind of development out of our Invest 96. You can see the Euro is all the way up to 80% chance that we can see something develop in the form of a tropical depression. We've lost a lot of confidence that that area to the south of Jamaica pushing north is going to develop. You can see that the Euro has now dropped it down to maybe somewhere between a 25-30% chance, and then it dissipates pretty rapidly once it kind of goes over Jamaica and attempts to push further to the north with that next frontal system. This is where things get a little interesting. At 168 hours out, this is November 4th, and then into November 5th, we're up to a 60% probability that a tropical depression could take shape in the southwestern Caribbean, really in line with what the GFS has been forecasting over the last several days. So this has my attention. We're not out of the woods just yet in terms of Jamaica, the Cayman Islands, Central America seeing another round of hellacious tropical style weather, and maybe even down here in the southeast. I'm really watching closely what our probabilities and our ensembles do in the Caribbean, coupled with what our jet level pattern is doing over North America as these fronts, troughs, and ridges come across the U.S. and Canada for that matter, because this whole thing could line up perfectly and we see cyclogenesis, or one small dynamic or one small piece of the puzzle could go awry and then the whole thing is a bust. So lots up in the air, nothing solid, nothing concrete, guys, but I'm definitely keeping my eyes on what could be a serious situation into the early part of November. Looking at our 12Z GFS ensembles, the GFS is still singing the same tune, cyclogenesis over the Caribbean, moving through Jamaica, Cayman Islands, deepening down into something substantial before rising to the north and potentially becoming an issue for Cuba, the Bahamas, and southwestern Florida. So definitely keeping an eye on this. I trust our long-range ensembles more than I do our deterministic models, especially from the likes of the GFS. So the ensembles are going to be our best friend in determining what our long-range pattern looks like and what our long-range forecast data is suspecting could take place between November 5th and November 9th. Cyclogenesis could occur before that, but in terms of seeing an organized system traveling somewhere down there, November 5th through the 9th is our likely suspect area or time frame we want to keep marked on our calendars. Looking through our 0Z European ensembles from last night, you can see quite a bit of agreement that our little Invest 96 could take on a tropical depression level of intensity before kicking out towards Bermuda, becoming a remnant low wrapped up with our next frontal system, the polar front jet, kind of deepening it into more of a post-tropical cyclone. And then a lot of our agreement for that system moving across Jamaica has gone down before we see another resurgence in model agreement that there could be something stronger on the horizon. And the Euro, once again, even looking at these ensembles, highlights that we could see it track off in this general north direction, eventually turning to the northeast. Once again, if you look at the timestamps, this is between the 7th, the 8th, and then into the 9th of November. Something wants to try to come out of the Caribbean. Do I think development is very likely? I do. Whether or not it takes on something deepening into a tropical cyclone or a very organized low-pressure center, we're still too far out to make that kind of a judgment call, but I'm definitely preparing for something to try to sneak its way in post-Halloween. Kind of like a delayed trick-or-treat scenario for us down here in the southeast, and the rest of our Caribbean natures watching for this thing as we go over the next couple of days. All right, here we go, ladies and gentlemen. This is our Halloween forecast. I have the model stopped. This is actually our NAM model that we're using to look a little bit more into the short-range forecast probabilities, and I have the clock stopped at 21Z October 31st, which is right around sunset for most of us across the East Coast. This is right about when the parents are taking the kiddos out for some good old trick-or-treating, and the Nazario family is definitely getting ready to suit up and prepare for the rest of Halloween night. You can see a large majority of the United States is actually going to be underneath polar high pressure, so we're looking at some pretty good conditions across the spectrum outside of maybe the mid-Atlantic states and the upper periphery of the southeast as that frontal system comes through. Could be seeing some increased wind speeds as well as some precip, especially over the Carolinas, Virginia, and up into the northeastern coastline of what looks to be Delaware, Maryland, pushing into the Jersey area. We'll have to see how that pans out. We're going to have a little bit of interaction going on between that tropical entity out there. This is Invest 96L, wandering to the north of our Bahama Islands. This is in prep right before it ejects to the northeast. So we could see a little bit of interaction, a little bit more increase of disturbed weather between the frontal system and the system butting up against of it. But unfortunately, it looks like for us here in Florida, the Panhandle as well, we're not going to see that cold weather come down just yet. So we're looking at a very warm, a very muggy, and a very sweaty Halloween evening. For those of you looking to go out and take advantage of the festivities. Here's a look at the exact same time using our temperature anomaly chart, and you can should see a large majority of the heart of the United States, the deep southern plains, spanning the Appalachians across the Northeast and the Great Lakes for that matter, are anticipating to be well below the seasonal average. A lot of cold air coming out of Canada, coming along with that frontal system, so I do think we're going to see a large spectrum of elevated winds as that system pushes through. Most of the United States is going to be seeing a clearing trend as soon as that front comes through because of how dense that layer of cold, dry air is. It's very bona fide polar air coming out of Canada. So all in all, for Halloween night, especially for those of you at this point in time, 21Z, the sun hasn't set for you and you haven't fully stepped out of the house to take part in the Halloween events that may be happening in your local area, it looks like you're in for a very wonderful evening. Just make sure to keep the kiddos bundled up. Try to avoid any kind of sickness coming on with the rapid fluctuation in temperature. As you guys remember, not too long ago on Weather Center, I was battling with the same thing when that first front came through southeastern United States. So it definitely goes without saying, make sure you're bundled up, make sure your costume is definitely favorable for this overnight cold weather event. And unfortunately, out to the west, we're going to see that ridge building in aloft, which means a return of elevated temperatures and warmer temperatures for that matter for most of the western United States and British Columbia as well. So that'll just about wrap up our Halloween forecast and Saturday segment of Weather Center Nazario. Thank you all for joining me this lovely Saturday afternoon. It was a great start down here in Central Florida. The sun was shining, the air was cool. However, it is now starting to warm up a little bit, as that is unfortunately the nature of the beast when you are a Sunshine State Floridian, guys. Anyways, we'll see you on Monday at 6 p.m. for a return to our Weather Center segments. As we all know, Sunday is my day of rest away from producing weather content. If anything big comes up on the horizon or down the road into November, I will definitely keep you guys posted. I will pop up either on a live stream or with a community post, so be on the lookout for that. But otherwise, folks, I hope you have a glorious rest of your weekend. Thank you so much for taking some time out of your day. I hope everything is great in your neck of the woods, and we'll see you again soon. This is Weather Center Nazario, signing out.